New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network proudly presents the 2025 season for Nonviolence Meditation Series, January 31st through April 4th. Embrace nonviolence every day with our 64 unique video meditations. Join us at 6 a.m. Mountain Time or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Featuring a collection of New Thought voices, the 2025 season for Nonviolence Meditation Series. Only on New Thought Media Network, January 31st through April
4th. Join our celebration of Black History Month. Only on New Thought Media Network. New videos every day at 6 a.m. Eastern Time or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. 28 unique Black History moments. Every day in February. Only on New Thought Media Network.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. Welcome to the Inclusive Church right here on the New Thought Media Network. Every week on Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, we come together, hang out a little bit, and think about what is required to actually lead in a way that supports inclusion of all different kinds of people, all different kinds of people what they share in common is interest in or expertise in the spiritual principles that are a reflection of what you teach and practice. I'm the author of the book, Stained Glass Spirit, Becoming a Spiritual Community Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness. And I'm working right now on the next book in the series, which, surprise, surprise, is going to be titled The Inclusive Church. So I'm so happy that you are with me today, and I invite you to do what Anita has done and say hello in the comment section or in the chat, depending on whether you are on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube. Let's dive in. Today, the topic, the focus is diversity is more than race. Now, I hope you're one of the people who are like, Tracy, that's so basic. Like, we've known that forever. We never confuse diversity with race or racism. But in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I have had at least 5 people define diversity as racism, or define diversity as focused on race and racism. So that's different from the people who are saying, if you pay attention to diversity, you are demonstrating racism. I'm not talking about that. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm talking about people who are thinking they are talking about diversity and why it's important and what they need to do. And the only thing they're talking about is race. There's a recent situation that's occurred in the last 3 weeks where someone was asking a minister for advice related to diversity, and the minister recommended, well, here are 5 people you can talk to. All 5 people were Black ministers, some of whom are people who have actually distanced themselves from other Black people, and that's okay if they are doing some other things related to diversity in the centers where they are leading. That could be great. But the recommendation was made in the context of, oh, you want to learn about diversity, you need to talk to these 5 Black people who will tell you things about diversity. So that's just one of 5 examples in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so when I was thinking about what to focus on for today, I was like, you know what? You can never go back to the basics too many times. And I know even for me, it's going back to the basics gives me an opportunity to review what I know, to actually be intentional about what I share, and to remember things that I've just taken for granted. So without any fussing, I hope, I don't mean to fuss or cajole or criticize or chastise people. What I want to do in the next 20 to 25 minutes, is just review what the definition for diversity is and how that relates to race and ethnicity and how it doesn't. And who knows, I may not even need 25 minutes for that. This is a toolkit session, so I really do try to keep it to 30-ish minutes or less. So, diversity. How does Tracy define diversity? Diversity is all the ways we are different from one another, both genetically and culturally. If you were to look in the dictionary, in most dictionaries, if you look up the word diversity, the first, second, or third word you will see is variety. Often it is the first word. The definition of diversity is simply variety. And of course, in the human race, we have many different varieties of people based on all kinds of groupings. Race is just one of those, or race and ethnicity are just 2 of the dozens of ways we are different from one another, and that there are established groups that can be recognized, right? So the typical adult in the US is a member of at least, the typical adult, at least 3 dozen groups. And even if you think about yourself, you can probably easily come up with a dozen off the top of your head. So, for example, yes, I am Black. I am a woman. I am a baby boomer. I am an entrepreneur. I am an author. I am someone who speaks English. I was born, raised, and live in the United States of America. I am a poet. I am a member of groups that are based on my gender, including sister, aunt, godmother, right? So we all have these identities that are based on our education, our profession, our family of origin, our chosen family, our sexual orientation, our gender identity, our religion, our where we grew up, all of those things give us cultural norms that when we put 100 random people together in our spiritual communities, there is so much diversity. And so when we remember this, we can stop assuming or equating diversity is only talking about race. I have been in communities and worked with groups where I'm working with 45, 50 people, and they are all the same race. And there is still diversity. So one of the things we really have to be careful about when we're using the word diversity is that anyone we're talking with is using the same definition. Otherwise, one person may be thinking they're having a conversation about how bad racism is, and the other person is having a conversation about the challenges that come with diversity. And their conversations may go like this, because one person is focused on only one element of diversity, and the other person is thinking about diversity across 8 or 9 different dimensions or elements. In the Stained Glass Spirit book, near the beginning, the first main section after the introduction and all of that is a section that is titled Biology, Sociology. No, that's the chapter that's titled that. The section is actually titled Diversity is a Divine Idea. The diversity is a divine idea. It is what God or Spirit has created, right? Created. It's all different from one another. That's no accident. So it must be a divine idea, an idea that comes from the source of life itself. Our job is to live based on spiritual guidelines with all of that diversity. So all of the challenges that we have created have been created by humankind, by humanity, by our culture, or by our ego. It has not been created that people who are different from one another are automatically in dispute with one another, or in conflict with one another, or in competition with one another. All of that comes out of society and the silliness we make up as human beings. So in this section, diversity is a divine idea. The first chapter of that section is titled Biology, Sociology, or Spirituality. And in this chapter, I write about some of the definitions that we use. So how I define diversity there is diversity is simply the existence of differences. Diversity includes all the ways we are different from one another. Every person contributes to the diversity of a group or the diversity within a community. Diversity simply exists, and it is neither bad nor good. Diversity exists, and it is neither bad nor good. That's a little hard to believe sometimes, isn't it? Because there are so many things that happen in our society where we look at diversity as a challenge, or there is discrimination and it's uncomfortable or painful or hurtful. And it's a challenge for us in our spiritual communities to recognize that we have an opportunity to do things a little bit differently than what happens in the larger society. it doesn't help for us to ignore what's happening in the larger society, because everyone in our community, in our spiritual community, is living in the larger society more hours per week than they are spending with us in our spiritual communities. So we must deal with what is happening or not happening, as well as be an example of what is possible. So it is critical for us to recognize that diversity is more than just race and ethnicity. So when we are in the conversations with other people, we can be the ones to make sure we are on the same page. Now, I want to just say a couple of comments or words about ethnicity, because I heard me just say, it's not just race and ethnicity. And a lot of times I have found that many people, more than I expected, don't really know what ethnicity is. Or they know ethnicity and they're confused about how it relates to race. So I do want to take 2 minutes maybe and talk a little bit about that. So our racial identity is based on physical or genetic characteristics. And our ethnicity is based on cultural patterns and norms. So I could be white by race, but I still also am a reflection of and a product of my ethnic experience. So I might be my family, right? My family of origin or where I grew up. So I might be white and be of French descent, or I might be white and be of Spanish descent or German descent, or right, any country or any cultural group that is based on national origin or where you were born and raised, or the culture that has been passed down generation by generation through your family. So your parents and your grandparents may have also lived in the US, but if they maintained the cultural norms from their parents and grandparents and great grandparents, then you may have been raised in a way that the cultural norms of your ancestral culture really, really do have an impact on who you are, how you are in the world, and the expectations you have for your own behavior and the behavior of others. The same thing is true. I could be Black and I could be of African descent. I could be of Brazilian descent. I could be Black and be from South Africa. I could be Black and be from Europe. So I have someone I know who's a great musician who grew up. She is Black and she grew up in Germany. And so there is a lot in her way of thinking, her way of behaving in the world that, she didn't grow up in the US in a southern state. And she grew up being exposed to Germany and German culture and German foods. And it's not that she's monolithic, right? She has some cultural aspects that are related to Black folks, and she has some cultural aspects that are related to being raised in Europe in general and Germany specific. So when we look at people and we say, oh, that person is this race, and that makes me know all about them. I know how to talk to them. I bet I know what kind of food they like. I bet I know, who they hang out with or the kind of people they hang out with. That doesn't work because we can look at someone and we may have a guess, we may have an idea, but until we actually get to know them or solicit their input, we don't know in any way that could be guaranteed how they themselves identify. And that's just with race and ethnicity. So, what I want to emphasize today is that beyond race and ethnicity, we don't want to ignore race or ethnicity because for a lot of people, that is a really strong identity. But we don't want to say we're talking about diversity or we're committed to diversity and then only use race as the example. I'm taking a breath. I invite you to take a breath as well. If you have questions about anything that I've shared so far, I invite you to drop that into the chat because, as I said earlier, for me, this seems like the basic of basics, but in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I've had at least 5 examples of people thinking diversity is only about race. I teach a class, and the title of the class is Diversity Issues for Ministers. And I teach this class to people who are students in the ministerial school. And so it's very interesting because these are the people who are already leaders in spiritual communities, right? They're already in leadership, they're already serving, but they are studying to become a licensed minister. And so it's always an eye-opener for me or a reminder for me when I can tell by what people say that what they've been exposed to up until now is that diversity is simply a way, or you use the word diversity when you talk about race, but diversity is more polite. No. Actually, if you're having a conversation about ending racism, or if you're having a conversation about how to interrupt racism or behavior that is based on a negative stereotype about race, then that's what you want to talk about. You want to talk about how the stereotype or the false belief about race is something you want to interrupt. Not the false belief about diversity, because diversity, again, covers race, gender, age group or generation, sexual orientation, gender identity, educational background, marital status, profession, political affiliation. Those are just a few of the many, many ways that we are different from one another that impacts the way we relate to one another, the way we support each other, the way that we understand each other. And so in the inclusive church, leaders really, really must be clear about what they're talking about and help others be clear as well. I am looking for, there it is, another piece in this section in the book. In the next chapter, The Stories We Tell, I'm quoting myself, but it's one of my favorite quotes that came out when I was teaching a workshop and someone asked a question. And the quote is this: diversity is not the problem. It is the stories we tell about diversity that are the problem, because it's the story, end quote, because it's the stories that we've made up about the way someone's differences are less than the way I am, or, this group is more important than the other group, or this group is weird, and so I don't want to have anything to do with them. But often the stories we make up about people from other groups are really negative, and they're just stereotypes. They are not true for everyone who is a member of that group. So as leaders in spiritual communities, there are some things for us to keep in mind. And if you do happen to have the book, these are on page 12. The desire and the commitment to build stained glass spiritual communities requires us to recognize the stereotypes driving our assumptions, the stereotypes driving our reactions, and the stereotypes that are reflected in our limiting beliefs. Continuing. The desire and the commitment to build stained glass spiritual communities requires us to recognize we are telling stories that are not the truth. And the desire and the commitment to build stained glass spirit communities requires us to replace the filters through which we see the world on a regular basis, the same way we replace the filters that make the furnace in our home work, or the filters we change in our cars to keep the engine in our car running effectively. This is true about all the filters related to all the different aspects of diversity, and it is especially true related to race. Dr. David Alexander posts, do you think the challenge is complicated by the fact that the U.S. administration is using DEI as code for race and ethnicity? I think that is a contributing factor, and more important for us to recognize is it's not a new contributing factor. So the political administration that's in power now and taking as much power as we, the people, will allow it to take, is simply building upon what has been happening for a really long time. And now it has reached that point where probably more people than not believe it, or more people than ever before are simply equating the acronym DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion as focused on race. So it's not helpful that we are seeing it in such powerful and public places. It means that those of us who are trying to create inclusive spiritual communities have to be sure we're having the conversation that says diversity actually is all the ways that people show up, and that is the divine design. That's how God created us. Different kinds of people in different parts of the world, different people who speak different languages, who have different skin tones, who have different cultural norms. Like, we didn't make that. We didn't make it up. And so diversity is. And then, yes, having conversations about what would equity look like and what is inclusion really meaning. So in our spiritual communities, especially in New Thought spiritual communities, we are fond of saying oneness. And we do have to be careful, like in the subtitle of the Stained Glass Spirit book, we're creating spiritual communities where oneness does not require sameness, because oneness and sameness are not synonyms. So today, again, I try when I'm not having a guest and we're having a conversation, I try to keep the toolkit sessions to about 30 minutes. So I'm noticing that my time is just about up for today. But I want you to think about that this week, this idea that I need to be careful of talking about race or racism and saying that, and use diversity when I actually am referring to all the ways that we are different from one another, the many ways that humanity shows up. And in our spiritual communities, that when we model that and when we invite people to have a more mature conversation and not just a reaction, that we are being the kinds of leaders who can actually model and provide coaching for the people in our communities who want to live our spiritual principles in this complicated, complex, multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-generational world we find ourselves in 2025. My name is Tracy Brown. I hope to see you next week, Tuesdays at noon, right here on the New Thought Media Network. Have a great week.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.